Today's video we're going to be exploring the design options and features available in the Divi page builder. We're going to be going through and basically seeing, checking out all of the standard design options you have there to give you an idea of what you can do with the visual builder when designing using Divi. So I've got a page here which is very standard. I've got a few headings, a bit of text, some images. I've just got it very plain to sort of get you an idea of what we can do if we start to play with it. So I'm going to enable the visual builder so that we can go in and start making our changes. All right, so we're in now, and I've mentioned this many times in videos before, but you've got these rows here, or their sections, I should say, where you can have various rows within them. The rows themselves are actually the green areas, and within them you have columns. This is one column. This green area has two columns, and then modules within those columns, which is an image, a call to action, and some text. Now, all of this is editable pretty easily. The first thing I'm going to touch on, we're going to sort of go from sections and down to, say, columns and into text. Now, they touch very quickly on these sections and columns, though, as most of the design options we're looking at are for modules. But if I click on a section here, you see I've got this full section, this blue area. I click on this little cog icon, and in this section we get some basic settings such as a link if we want to put up a link in there, so if anyone clicks anywhere in this section they get taken away. But the first thing you're going to look at is the background. We can start to set background colors here, and there is a text module in there, but we can start to choose colors from the picker here, or you can click into the body and choose a color and even make it semi-transparent if we want to from there and get there. And you might notice if I bring that transparency down that there's an image. This website has a background image, and because I've chosen the color, it was just plain white by default. Being semi-transparent brings out that background image just in this particular instance. So we can do that with the background color. We can also set gradients. So if I click here to add a gradient, I've got two colors, so I can choose black, and then I can click on the second color and choose purple, and I can move that gradient direction around. So if I just pop this off to the side here, just bring it back out, you can see we're going from left to right, or I can sort of move that around. I can also choose the start and end position of, so if the first color is black, and I want that black to be tucked right in, I can bring that start position in to move that. You can also get the end position and move that in to get a sharper gradient if I want to. I can also place it above the background image or below the background image, which we'll come back to. And then there's also other things such as a radial gradient, so we get like a nice circular effect. Now, we can also go in here into image, and I'm going to come back to the gradient after we've touched on the image, where we can choose a background image of some sort, such as maybe we choose the picture of this man at the river, and you can see what we've got here. And if we want to change the color of the text in here to match the background better, we actually want to change the module design settings, which we'll get to later. So at the moment, this is all just the section settings, all in that first tab for content. And then there's even more under design and advanced. But we're still just looking at background here. So at the moment, if I scroll up and down, the image doesn't move. So if I turn parallax on, we get this cool sort of scrolling effect where the background scrolls at a different rate to the screen. If I change the method from true to CSS, it just stays in the one spot in the background while we scroll. So that's can be a pretty nifty effect if you want to use that. You got a few other options here, such as image size. You can choose cover, or you can have it fit, so it will actually make sure it doesn't chop off any of the image if you want it to fit and show the entire image. This can have a bit of an ugly effect if not planned well. And you can also have the position of the image be, say, to the left or to the bottom right. And if we go back and change this to cover, you'll see it's actually chosen the bottom of the image because I've chosen bottom center. If I go top right, it chooses the top of the image. If I choose center, it chooses the center of the image. And because the image is really tall, it's not really moving left to right much, but you sort of get the idea. And you can choose to have it repeat up and down the page. So if I actually go back and change it to fit again, I can have it repeat in all directions or one direction. And I can have a bit of space around it if I want to. Round, there's a few options there to play with. And then of course you can choose different blending image options. So this is where it starts to get really interesting, because you can actually choose like exclusion. I was going to put the background image size here back to cover, but under background image blend, Oops, we're going to change that to no repeat. Because we've got that gradient there, this gradient here, which if I just soften it up a little bit, we've got a pretty cool effect here. Under background image blend, I can change, if you've ever used Photoshop, it's a lot like Photoshop. Multiply will darken the background image, which is why in the black area of the gradient you can see nothing, but you can see a bit of information in the purple. Do the same screen where we get the inverted effect, which actually brings out all the lighter colors on top of a darker background. Overlay kind of combines the two a little bit, but because we're dealing with extreme colors like black, and you can see the effect here, it kind of mutes it a bit. And you got all these different sort of effects you can try to get different looks to how your image blends with any of the elements underneath it, and it's pretty cool. Have a play with those, but you can really get some cool effects out of what you're doing there. Now we're going to go back to normal here, because that's essentially your background settings, and this can apply, this background section here, we won't go through it every time, but those same settings will apply to any module or column you use, and we may just quickly show you but not go through in depth, because you sort of get the idea here. But the final tab, you can go back and set a video if you want to. So if you've got an MP4 you want to upload that's not too big, you can pop that up there and have a video going in the background if you want. But backtracking now to the gradient. Now that we have an image there, we can go down to this gradient where it says place gradient above background image. If I do that, it means it's kind of like shuffling cards. It places the gradient over the top of the image so we can't see it. But if I take the black here and move the transparency down, you can see it revealing the image behind. So this can be handy if you decide to choose another color for the purple. Maybe you choose a darker purple and you turn it right back. You can almost create a bit of a vignette effect over the image. Or if you actually want it to be semi-transparent so that the image doesn't compete with the background too much, you maybe choose white, make that, whoops, sorry, first color, make that like a white color, knock the transparency down, and the second color we can do the same, knock that right up and make it semi-transparent. So you actually get a nice overlay over the top of the image to sort of remove it from the background. Now, whenever we go through this little section settings panel here, it's going to be the same for everything else we look at. We're going to have one section here for the content, design, where we have all of our design options, and then advanced for more advanced options such as assigning. I won't spend too long on this, but if you do code CSS, you can assign CSS IDs and classes to this section or whatever it is that you're actually editing, whether it's a text module or a column. You can also add CSS in directly, and if you hover over, I believe if you hover over them somewhere, it does bring up the name of the element, but it doesn't seem to be doing that right now. Conditions, so you can add conditions on how it displays. Visibility, such as hiding it on a phone or a tablet or desktop, which will grey it out because I'm on a desktop at the moment. But if I were to then say view this on a phone or tablet, it would then appear. And you've got all these options. It's a bit more advanced, but it shows you can take certain advanced options on how you want it to display or not display at all. And then you've got little transitions and things like that. Position, you can actually set the position on the page and offset things. So you've got you can play around with that a bit there. A little bit more advanced, something you want to play with a little bit because you can have unanticipated results depending on what you do. So I'm just going to reset all of these settings. Like if you go from one size monitor to another, you might find it doesn't work the way you want it to. So I generally sort of just leave those alone. But this design tab is where it's all at, and I'm going to touch on a few things, explore some, and go from there. So with the layout, we can choose an inner shadow. So if you look at this section here and I choose inner shadow, there is a slight shadow being introduced there. It's very slight. You can't really see it at the moment, but it is there. It's just there. If you have two elements that are the same color next to each other, it can help differentiate them. So that's one option there. Dividers. Now this is very cool and specific to sections. There's a top and a bottom divider section here. There's a divider style. So if I'm going to choose the bottom, say we want to keep the top nice and straight, whatever we're doing here with the bottom can be applied to the top. So if I choose a divider style like this one, where we get this divider, I can also do something similar with the top by choosing something like that. but it doesn't really suit that effect. So we're going to clear the top one and go through all these options with the bottom. So we can create these cool dividers, and you've got a range of options you can choose from there to create different effects. And of course, you can change the height if you want it a little less aggressive, or you can bump it right up if you want it super aggressive. And you can even choose the color. It will automatically try to detect the color. Sometimes it does fail, so it might be good to actually assign the color that you want it. Or if you actually want something a little bit different, you can actually just choose a different color to get a cool effect along the bottom like that. So it's a pretty cool effect. And of course, you can flip the divider here, there, and even change how much it repeats. So if I really crank that up, get that divider height down, it doesn't really have the design effect there. But you sort of get the idea. We can play with how it works and change the height, width, and color of that divider. So the dividers is a very cool feature. Now, what you also want to do, you may have noticed, if I pop that height right up high like this, and I make it white, you can see the text over the top, which is good in this instance. But divider arrangement, if I click on that, I can actually have it on top of the section content, so it actually hides whatever's in there. So if you decide that's something that you want, you can also set that up as well. So I'm just going to tone that down, and we're going to keep playing from there. So I'm just going to collapse this dividers section. Sizing. Now you can actually change, this is pretty straightforward. You can change the width, the height. I can make the width 50% of the section, which looks a bit odd there. But I can also align it to the center, and I can change that. I can also have it set to 100%, but set a maximum width of 800 pixels, which means if you have a particular image or something you don't want to exceed a certain width, but you want it to be 100% width of the screen, if the screen is small, you can set that up as well. So you've got a few options there. I'm going to clear this. The minimum height is the same. I can choose a minimum height of 500 or 300 something pixels. And so regardless of what we do, if I make the height, you can adjust those heights to what you want. However, I recommend, this might not suit absolutely everyone, but most people, I do recommend keeping it at that standard height, maybe adjusting your margins or spacing, padding I should say, in order to get a more flexible container size depending on what you're doing, and it'll work better across all devices. But you can see here we've got our width, our maximum width, minimum height, maximum height. So you've got a lot of options there to change the width and height of a particular section, and this also applies to any text areas or images. Now, when I said before about margin and spacing, now margin is the outside of the actual section or the module we're changing, and padding is the inside. So we've got outside and then inside. So if I add a 50 pixel margin to the top, you can see we've got a 50 pixel space at the top. If I add 50 to the bottom, we've got a space at the bottom. And the same on the left and right, where if I add in say 20 and 1 and say 400, we get these margins either side. You can't really see them at the moment for some reason, but sometimes they don't always work depending on what it is you're editing. But you can see here how the margin affects the outside of the section. If I clear that and go to padding, this time if I add in a padding of say 150 to the top, there's now padding inside that section. So any of the objects inside of it, like this text module, has a space around it from within, so from the outside inwards of the section. Do the same at the bottom and add 200 and have this nice big section. And you can even then add, say, let's go back to say 50, 75 or 75. Now you might find that works great for desktop and not so great for phone. So maybe you hover over the phone symbol here. You can choose tablet and adjust the tablet size. You get to phone, you go, bit too big. Let's knock that down to say 30 and 40, and you can tighten that up a bit. So on phone it's smaller and on desktop it's larger. So that's a cool feature too. You click on that phone symbol to set a desktop, tablet and phone setting for that particular section, for the spacing. So now I close that down. Now we've got border. Now I can add, if you see here, we've got rounded corners. I can actually make that say 50 pixels by 50 pixels and get a little round corners around the edges there. I can crank it right up and just keep rounding those corners. 200. and get a nice round look there. Looks a bit weird there, but we'll actually do that later on an image just very quickly to show you. But if I clear that, we get nice square corners. The other thing you can do is unlink these and just round one corner. Like this over here. So you've got a few options there to round corners. Probably better for smaller modules. The effect would be sort of better placed. And we can also add borders. So if I choose a red border down here, which is the border color, I can crank up that width and get a nice big border around that section if I want to as well. However, I can knock the width back down and choose the top, bottom, the top, right, bottom, or left. So if I choose the top, I can just add a border to the top only if I want to as well. So you've got some pretty cool options with borders there. And then of course with the top border style, and this applies to all styles, you can choose this in anywhere. I can also choose dashed, so we get this dashed border, dotted, a double style border, sort of like a groove border, ridge. You got all these different styles you can play with to get a cool effect. So outset, solid. So you do have some pretty cool options. I'm just going to make this black and turn it down a bit. You can also click on the color and choose the opacity to knock it down a little bit as well if you wish to do that. And the other thing, if I now collapse this border section, you've got box shadow. This isn't going to look too great here specifically, but if I add a shadow, we get a nice shadow underneath that section. And I'm actually going to explore that later with something where you can see it a bit better. Now we're starting to get down to the nitty-gritty bit. We've got filters. So this is similar to what we did before, except the more of a slider-based situation where I can change the hue, which is changing the color spectrum of the image and everything in that container just a little bit. So if we want it to be a little less green and a little more blue, we can try and find that nice blue color. We can also crank the saturation up so it's nice and bright. We'll bring it right down till it's black and white. So you've got a lot of options here to adjust your image as you would say in Photoshop or any other image editor. You can also make it sepia. There's a sepia setting there. You can invert it so the whites become blacks, the blacks become white. So you get this other cool effect. And you can also change the opacity and make it semi-transparent or even blur it. And then again, we have the same blur modes that we had before we were looking at with the background. Now, something else that you might find interesting, and I'm going to use invert because I think it's going to have the biggest effect. I'm going to first of all reset some of these because they're just a little bit all over the place. Turn the sepia off. We're back to our normal setting now. If I hover over invert, there's a little sort of mouse pointer here for hover. So if I leave this the way it is and then change it to hover and crank it all the way over to the other side. Now if I hit tick, you'll see whenever we hover over that, I'll just exit the builder, so I'll just click out for a second. So I've just exited the builder, and you'll see if I hover over this, we get this inverted effect. So you can actually set and change a whole bunch of these design options to be different when you hover over the object. So another great feature of the design section in Divi. All right, I'm gonna head back into edit now. All right, so we're back in now. I'm going back into our settings, back into the design. And we've got two more left, which is transform. I can transform the size of this section. I can even rotate it. Rotate it this way. Rotate it this other way here, like this. And once again, we can also set up hover for this as well. I'm going to reset. We can skew it this way. We can also see how it's skewing both directions. I can actually unlink it over here, straighten it up a bit, and just skew one direction. Now this looks pretty crazy at the moment. Doesn't look great, but there are certain applications where it could work. So I'm just going to remove that again. And then of course we have this here where we can move things around, change the positioning a little bit, like that. So you've got a few options to transform, and this actually does apply again to all the smaller modules and elements as well if you want to do something a little bit different. Now finally we have animation. So when the page loads, we have these animation settings. If I click on fade, as the page loads, you'll see it fades into screen. And I can change the duration to really long, so we get this slow fade, or really quick so that when we go back, we get a really quick fade. You see, you can barely see it. Finding a good duration which actually grabs the eye is good. You can also have a delay. If I set this delay for like 26 milliseconds, we've got 2.5 seconds before it fades in. So you can set delays as well. Now it's actually fading in from 0. If I put this at 50%, it'll sit at 50% and then fade in. So you've got these little sliders you can do. You can change the easing of the animation. Now this means instead of the animation just being one consistent speed, it can be faster at the start, slower at the end, and vice versa. Linear means it's just straight. However, if you watch, I change it to ease out, it'll be faster at the start and slow down at the end. And then I do the same thing, ease in. And then you've got ease in, ease out, where it goes slow at the start, fast in the middle, and slow at the end. So you've got all of these different settings. And you can set it to loop if you want to. That might drive people crazy. So generally, I leave that at once. So you've got those animation settings, and again, they apply to just about anything on your page. So this is just for a section. It actually doesn't have all of the options that we have in other areas because different modules and different areas have different options. So I'm just going to tick out of that. So we've styled our little section. I've actually added a hover in there unintentionally, but you know what? We're just going to leave it there. Now, I'm going to quickly touch on this image just to show you a few quick things on that before we get into the text. So if I actually, getting ahead of myself, I'm going to go into this section here for the row. And if you click on design, you'll see we have pretty much all the same options. If I choose box shadow, you can see it shadows that area. Doesn't look that great, but I can go down to my spacing if I want to. Add in a bit of padding, so we might go 50, 50, 50, 50 to get a cool effect like this. So you can actually create nifty effects on that section quite easily. Otherwise, you've got your border if you want it. Maybe you want to add, in this particular instance, a bottom border, which is green. We pop that border width up so we get like a nice little box. So you got a few options there for that. But the other thing too is if I go back to my content, so we were just in the design tab, if I click on an individual column, I can also work on that. So if I go into background and choose background color, I can lighten that a little bit and you'll see the left column has a slightly different color. And again, the design options are the same. I can go into spacing. I can add some spacing in there. Again, 30, 30, 30 to get like some spacing and create a little column section there. And yeah, if you really want to take it to the next level, you can also play with the box shadow again. So I'm going to go through a few of these box shadow settings now that we can look at it in this full column. Now, there's only a text module in this column. So you can see it kind of looks like I'm just editing the text module. I'm actually editing the column itself that is within this section, the full column. So if I add anything else down here, it'll appear within here. So you can see here we've got an external shadow, which pops up on the outside. It's a little hard to see, so for the sake of the video, we're going to crank up the opacity to full so you can really see what's going on here. External shadow, and then we've got a shadow that goes off to one side, and a nice little shadow at the bottom. We've got like a solid shadow, a larger solid shadow, and then an internal shadow. If you want that cutout effect, and the same again, but solid. Now, nearly all of these have different settings here you can play with. If I choose this one here, I can actually move the position around and almost achieve the same effect as I do on the other one. I can change the blur strength to solid, or I can move it and make it larger. So essentially what you're seeing here, apart from the internal settings here, are more like presets. I can then switch to the internal shadow and I can bump up the strength and I can make the shadow green. I can move it around and basically change the nature of the shadow itself to get a certain effect. So you can see here, even box shadow position, inner and outer, you can achieve all of these settings with the settings below. So they are essentially presets, but sometimes it's good just to be able to switch from one to the other. It will hold that color. So let's make the color black. And that's how you can set up little shadows for items on your page, even individual modules. If you think that shadow is too strong, well, for one I'm going to do is decrease the blur, but I can go into my color and just take the opacity down. We have a much more subtle shadow now behind that box. And that is styling a column. And you also have the same options as before. If I go into content, background, I can actually choose a gradient. I can choose an image. I can add a video and use all the same settings we had before, but we're not going to touch on those right now. So as you can see, we've explored design options that are available through our sections and columns and the actual row area. You can actually slightly see a line where that shadow we added before is. Now I'm going to touch on this image for a minute so we can really go through some more of these design settings to see what you can play with. So once again, the colors where we get the boxes, the blue is the section, the green is where the columns are, and then the individual column settings are in there, in these cogged areas. This image and any of the modules are in gray. This text module has a gray box, but all of the buttons are pretty much the same apart from a few minor differences. If I hover over the image and click on this gray cog, you'll see I have, once again, I have the same settings. So if I had a transparent PNG here, which I might just grab for the sake of it, you'll see my images here. I can then add a background image as well. Because this image has transparency in it, I can click, say, this sand, and you'll see there's actually now a background behind the image within the image module, which is handy. It can be handy. I haven't had to use it, but I have had many thoughts on how I could use it. I'm actually going to X that to reset, go back in. So you do have all the same settings again with the background. Again, you go to design and you get a few slightly different things like with the alignment. Now, if the image size, if I make sure the width is only 60%, I can align it left, right, or center. And if the image itself isn't actually big enough to fill the space, you can also align it here, which makes no difference to what we're looking at right now. But yeah, if you've got a smaller image in a larger space, you can do that. Or you can go into sizing and make it, force it to the full width of that section. So if this image was smaller and I clicked force full width, it would then be the full width of the column to keep everything nice and neat. So all those sizing settings are basically the same. The alignment, spacing, I can add margins and padding, although the padding, if I add in 20, 20, 20, 20, still goes onto the module itself. So if I have a background color on the image module like the green, it looks more like a border, so maybe I add a background image, darting around a bit here just to try and demonstrate what I mean. So by having this padding here, it actually creates padding in the module around the image. But if I add a margin of 50, 50, 50, 50, then it actually adds padding around the module. So the module kind of has the image inside of it, and you're actually styling the module itself that is holding the image, not necessarily styling the image itself. I don't know if that makes sense, but if you play with it a little bit, I'm sure it will start to make sense. So I'm going to actually reset those settings. Now, what I really want to look at is the border. You can see here we have the rounded corners. So as I said before, if I add 100 pixel bottom, it's like rounded corner there, we have these rounded corners. Just going to remove that background image. Back to where we were. Now we've got 100 pixels, 100 pixels, 100 pixels. If I change this back to 0, unlink it, and I add, say, 20 here, 100 there, we can get some pretty nifty effects. So maybe 30. You can see over here, we have a different sort of like effect with that image. So you can get some cool effects just by rounding the corners, and you can do them at different rates depending on where you're coming from. If I make this 500, it will round all the way beyond the top corner, unless I add a little rounding at the top, say 30, to get a different effect that way. Maybe I want to add 30 again and make this one 100, and you get a pretty unique shape with that image. So let's keep that shape as we did before. We can add in a border, we can make it red, and that actually applies to that shape as well, which is pretty cool. So we've explored the border and the rounded corners before. So now, once again, we can add a box shadow. We can change the horizontal position to the other side so it stands out a little bit more. Blur strength, and let's make that a little darker. So you can start to see now how we can style one element using some of these settings. We've got this image with the shadow, And I can also then go down to filters and change any of this around like we did before if I don't like the image. But where you can really see the difference is with transform. If I decide to make that a bit smaller, and then I decide to rotate it just a little bit, I can do this. I can then also set up a hover, it rotates the other way, and then I can also skew it just a little bit. So I'll actually go to, sorry, I'll actually put it on mobile, not hover. So I want to rotate down, and then on hover, rotate up, then I go to skew, and because I've still got it on hover, you can see here, desktop, hover, I can skew it a little bit as well to get a different kind of effect. And then of course I can add in an animation. Now this is where you're going to be able to see most of this. So it can fade in, it can slide in. So you can see how it slides in from the center. You can also have it slide in from the right, which looks pretty good. We can have it slide down from the top, slide up from the bottom. The center's cool because it kind of like appears, but of course we can also go right and we can change the animation intensity so it's really long, or we can knock it right down so it just slides in. And you've got a lot of those options we were looking at before. We also have some other options here you can explore and change these settings to, such as bounce, where it bounces a little bit, zoom, similar to slide in when you choose center, flip, which if we crank up the intensity really shows something different, fold, and roll. So you've got a bunch of animation styles here you can use for when the image appears. And so that shows you with this one little box what sort of things you can do to create a really unique looking element on your page. So if I tick, and I'm going to actually just exit so we can check out this hover. So I'm just going to Alright, page is reload. You can see we had that little animation there. I hover over it. It goes, swings all the way around the other side and moves around. So now this is not something I'd recommend you do on your website, but it shows you the kind of lengths you can go to, or the kind of extreme effects you can get by playing with the design tab in Divi with certain elements of your page. Now, getting on to some of the text module stuff, which means I'll just go back into the Visual Builder. Now, we're starting to get into the nitty-gritty. I'm actually going to go to this call to action first, because we've got all of our text here, but we've also got a call to action here which has a button. If I choose the cog module there, again, same options as before with the background. I can choose what text goes into the button. It says click here. I can say click now, and you can see it's changed to click now. And we add our link in here. But with the design settings over here, we got now all these text options. So you can see we've got a title here. If I choose the title text, I can make the size a bit bigger. You can see that's a bit bigger. And I can change the font and change all of these settings here, which I'm going to touch on in a little bit. And the text in general, I can change settings, add shadows, all that. But we're going to do that over here, because what I want to get to at the moment is the button. You see here we've got use custom styles for button is turned off. So at the moment, this is the default style I have for the buttons set when I set up the theme customizer. If I turn that on, now I can change the button size to something much larger or much smaller. I can change the size of the button, the text color. I can make it semi-transparent if I want to, but I'm going to go back to black. And the button background at the moment is not set, hasn't got a color set, so it's choosing the default color. I can choose purple, blue, maybe I even choose white. And I can even do gradients like I did before. So I can add a gradient. So we see we've got this cool gradient effect, which sort of shows a bit weird when you hover over it. So I'll move that. But we can choose a background image as well. Now for some reason there's an error here, but all the background image settings are the same. I have been recording this for a while. I do quite often get errors when I'm recording these videos for some reason. So you can choose an image like you would the background of the section we looked at the start of the video. So I'm just going to leave that for now. We can change the button border width. Just going to reset that. Just ignore that. Where it says button border width, I want to choose a button border color of red so we can see it. Now I'm going to crank that border width up so we have a nice thick border on our button. Now I'm going to just actually close this for a sec. and head back in. One thing about the button background, you'll notice when I hover over it, it goes black and you can't see. So once again, I can choose this hover to change the background of the actual button. Or I go to the button text color and choose the little mouse pointer, choose the hover section and make the text white. So now when I hover over it, it goes white. When I go back to desktop, it's black. So you can change what happens to the button when you hover. At the moment, it increases in size because of an icon that's been added there. So I can also choose to turn off the button icon, so it just moves. But if I want to choose to have that icon on, I can choose a completely different icon from this list, like this light bulb, and it'll show the light bulb on there as well. And you've got that option just to set that as well. You can also change the button to left or right and go from there. But you've got a lot of basic options there. The border radius, you can actually move that all the way down if you want a square button, all the way across if you want a round button. Make it whatever sort of shape you want. The letter spacing you can increase and decrease. You can even set that to hover as well if you decide you want to do something like that. And even change the font to something completely different. So you've got all those options. Even change the font weight from regular to bold. Some fonts will have upwards of 5 or 6 different weights. You can choose, so it might be light, ultra light, regular, bold, semi-bold, black. And then you can also add it to italics. You make it all capitals. You can play with all of the normal text settings you would have in a text editor in that button. And then of course you can add a text shadow to the button. So that shadow goes around the text itself, which we'll have a look over here in a little while. And you've got the same shadow settings as before, so you can move that shadow around. As you can see over here, it sort of sits right off because I've moved it right over. And you can add a bit of space around the button. So let's say we want to give it a bit of space at the top. We give it 200 pixels. It adds a 200 pixel space above the button. Or you can add padding around the button. Top and bottom, we can give it 100, 100, 10, and 10 either side. So you get this really tall, narrow button instead. Because that's padding, it's inside the button. Margin, outside the button. It goes outside and then inside. And of course, we can add an internal shadow or an external shadow. So we can add shadows to the button as well. So you've got all these options to really customize the button and get it looking the way you want, down to the shadow color and position. Now everything else here is basically the same as before, so we're going to tick out, and this button doesn't look very good, but we're going to move on. So now we're going on to text, because you really want to make sure you style text the way you want. So when I click on this cog setting over this text module, you can see I've got heading 2, heading 3, I've got heading 1 up here for reference, but this isn't going to affect heading 1 because we're editing this module directly. But if I go over, now once again, same settings as before. I can set up the background, I can make it blue, and then I can even add more padding to have it show up, kind of like what we did with the column, and you can further enhance that text area. But I'm going to remove that, and we're going to focus more, if I go to this Design tab, on the text itself. If we go from the bottom up, you see we've got the same animation options as before, the same transform options as before, the same filters, box shadow, border, the spacing, which is the margin and the padding, the outside and the inside, and sizing. We can set that up and change the size of the text box that the text is within as well. Those are all the same as we've seen before. So now we can just focus on the text and the heading text. Now, there's so many design options in other modules that are very specific to those modules that I don't have access to here. But I feel like you get the gist of what we're going for when we explore these sections. So if I go to text, I can change the text font like we were saying before. And this is just for... Now in this text area, you'll see a few tabs here. This first one is just for the basic paragraph text. So if I change that color to red, you can see it's the paragraph text here we're changing. I can change it back to black. Or here, this little chain is actually the link. So if I want to, I can change that link color to purple, which you can now see here. That link is now purple. And if you see the dot points down here, I go down to dot points and so on. I can change those. So I can actually go into text font here, which is just the default setting. But maybe I want to make it a light font instead of what it is. So now we have this lighter text. I can change the text size if I want to a little bit, move that around until we're happy with it, and it'll sort of govern some of the smaller areas unless I alter those directly. We can change the letter spacing. Now you can see here it's got 0 pixels and onward, and you can see how I've moved that there. change that style. If I type in -1, whoops, it actually, I hit enter on that one, so it's closed it down. So back to design, back to text. -1 will actually stay there, and it's very close together. I can actually type in -2, click off, and get it really close, which looks kind of not right. So we'll go back to 0. You can also adjust your line height. So if you want some areas to have a higher line height than others, you can change that too. And we're going to get onto the box shadow when it comes to the heading, but you can see here we can center, right. And with this first area here, this text area, if I do something, it'll actually apply it to even the headings. And again, the headings then become secondary to that, so I can adjust the headings directly. But if I do actually add in that text shadow, it adds it across the board, so in the little bits of text and the text at the top there. So I can actually have all the same shadow options as I did before. Change the blur strength a little bit. I could even do something different and go for white. So I actually come in here. So that way it actually gives the text a bit of a highlight around. You can't really see it there, but you'll see it if I do the blue. Oh, sorry, the sort of the aqua greeny color. And we've got this effect like that. So I'm going to go back. I'm just going to turn that off. And the text color is set to light or dark. Over here, the text setting is set to light. So if I change this to light, it'll automatically make most of the text light, except that I've actually assigned a color to it as black. So if I just remove that and just reset it, it treats the background as dark and therefore makes most of the text as light as it can. If I change it back to dark, it changes it back to dark. And that's just a nice quick global setting, so that if you go in and you've got all your default settings, you can just make the text light or dark without getting too specific in that area. So now it gets a little more different. If I go to the link tab here where I've got my purple link, I can make the font weight ultra bold. So now we have a really bold link for all of our links. On top of that, I can italicize, I can underline. So if I want to have underlined links, I can make them all capitals. I can change the font stylings of the link, specifically even the link size. So we get these big links on these pages if we crank it up, or we can have these really small links. So you have very direct control over the links themselves and even the link letter spacing. And once again, if I decide I want to do a hover effect, I can actually have it hover green when I go over it as well, to get these cool effects that way with the links. So you do have a lot of control over the links if you're someone who really wants to customize every tiny piece. And of course, if you're using the theme builder and you choose the content module, you can do the same adjustments. So you see how we can take control of the individual areas. The same goes for dot points. However, there are a few extra options there for dot points. So the unordered list text color is unordered being a bullet pointed list. I can make the text blue if I want it to be completely different, or I can reset that. I can make the size different. I can do all those same things. I can actually change the line height, which is pretty handy for a text list. Sometimes you need those a little bit wider to differentiate. But there are a few other options there, such as here, unordered list type. Disk, you can also have a circle, so like a hollow circle. A square, we have a square, or you can have none and just have it be there. We're going to choose a square just to be a little bit different, and we can indent that list, as you can see here. And of course, the list style position inside, outside, just changes whether the dots are inside the text or outside the text. So you can style those, and it's the same again with, if I go back down, same again with the numbers. If you look to the numbers here, I've got decimal, I've got Hebrew. There's all these other options for numbers if you really want to get specific. Armenian, and you can try all these different upper Romans. So you got a whole bunch of these numbered types you can use, and then indent as well. So that's how you can really get in. And of course, if you've got a quote block in there, you can style that as well. So you've got all these options to take over every tiny piece of your text to style it the way that you want. So now I'm going to collapse that text module and move on to heading text. And it's the same thing again. If I choose heading 1, I can make, well, heading 1's actually not in this module. So let's go to heading 2. I can make the heading 2 size really big. I can go to heading 3 and make that a bit smaller, although these are actually all heading 2s, I'm realizing right now. So if I go back to content for a second, text, make the heading 3 a heading 3, heading 4 a heading 4, get back to design and heading. You can see how we've got these varying sizes now. So we've got a heading 6. If I go to heading 3, I can make it a bit bigger. I can choose to make the heading 3 font weight light. And maybe for heading 4, I decide I want to be even bigger again. This time I'll go light again, italics, and then maybe I'll make it red. So you can actually change all the heading styles that you want individually as well. And same as before, I can right align that heading over here. If I go to heading 2, which we'll do more on just because it's easier to see, I can make that right aligned, center, and all the headings will sort of take on that characteristic. And then I can change all the letter spacing and all the usual bits and pieces. I can even add another shadow within that, and it'll take over the other shadow that we've set. So you've got all of those standard options for every heading type. So that is, if you want to style all of the text, you've got the basic text in here, except for your headings, and then all the headings are under the heading text area there. And you'll find there are actually even some things such as full screen headers, full width headers and things like that, where you'll have a subtitle area and they'll have a little subtitle section there with all the same options. So those are the vast majority of the styling options you'll find in the Divi Builder. You'll find that some have some pretty specific things in there, but you get the idea. If you head to that content tab, which I'll just touch on again while we're wrapping up, content tab has some basic settings. The design tab is where all of the visual settings sit, or the majority of the smaller, more direct visual settings sit, and you can go through and explore those. And I highly recommend even just taking some time to build some pages and explore those settings. And if you get any ideas, try to make them happen so you get that practice that allows you to really understand the design tab in the Divi Builder. So a longer video today. I hope it was interesting to you, but it shows you just how powerful Divi is at creating some pretty custom websites. This page is not an example of something that looks good, but it is an example of something, how far you can take these things. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please give it a like. And of course, if you don't have the Divi theme, don't forget to head out there and grab a copy. There's a link in the description below. Otherwise, I have a full series of videos showing you how to build a website in Divi and how to basically do all the bits and pieces to build pages, set up templates and everything. So that playlist will be on the screen and also in the description below. Otherwise, have a nice day and I'll talk to you again soon.